up, man. God, sit down, Joe. Why you think I'm eating? Sit down, Joe. Huh? Sit down quick. Why you think I'm eating? Sit, the dumbbells are here. You doing this too? No. Sit down quick, Joe.
Well, we're having a scene, as you can see, and it's hard to tell whether it's clowning or for real between the two fighters. This kind of thing has been going on all along in terms of promotion of the fight, and this time it seems to be for real, because Joe Frazier is really angry. I think that Ali is probably clowning.
Do you have a bodyguard? Do you have...
No.
You don't?
I got one bodyguard. When he wishes to create a thing, he just orders it to be and it comes into existence. But this order is not conveyed in words, which takes a tongue to formulate or which sound carries ears. He hears the secrets of those under quiet thoughts. He stops those who's that? That's God. Oh, he's my bodyguard. He's your bodyguard.
TheDeenShow. Time for the TheDeenShow. People, are you ready for the TheDeenShow? Time for the TheDeenShow.
Greetings and peace. How you guys doing? Welcome to the Dean Show. I got a special guest here with me, Jonathan Eig. He's the critically acclaimed, best-selling author. We're going to get into a story. And then from the story, let's see. I mean, the picture might give it away, but Jonathan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for being with us on the Dean Show.
Thank you.
Don't go to the shot with the picture yet. We're going to start off with a story from your book.
Yeah.
Okay? And then we're going to get into more from there. It starts off, I'll start it off. It was an elderly man with his grandson, right?
That's right.
And he was looking for a famous individual. He ends up finally finding him. And what happens then? Tell us about the story. You take off with it.
This elderly man, he's from Tanzania, with his grandson, travels to the United States. They go to Chicago first, knocking on doors, looking for Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali.
They can't find him in Chicago. They hear that he's moved to Los Angeles. They take a plane to Los Angeles, and they go riding around in a taxi looking for a house that looks like Ali's house. They have a picture of Ali's house from the newspaper, and they find the house. They go up, knock on the door, and they're carrying a Big Mac in a bag because they want to make an offering, a humble gesture of to Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
You don't arrive empty-handed.
Yeah.
So this elderly man and his grandson knock on the door, and Ali answers, and the old man says, "We've come all the way from Africa. We were looking for Muhammad Ali. I wanted my grandson, to meet the great Muhammad Ali before he died. I want him to be able to say that he met Muhammad Ali." And Ali this is the mid-1990s now. He's been out of the spotlight for a while. He's older. He's has trouble walking. He speaks very softly. He murmurs and very softly, hard to understand.
Was this around the 80s now?
This is the
Late
mid-90s.
Mid-90s.
Yeah, before he lights the Olympic torch. So
Yeah.
he's really in a period of where he's not getting a lot of attention. He's a little bit depressed, to be honest.
Yeah.
But he welcomes this old man and his grandson into the house. He makes them sandwiches. He eats the Big Mac. And
He actually
he ate the Big Mac.
He
Yeah,
ate the Big Mac.
like
Wow.
one bite. And his manager, Larry Kolb, was there with him. And Larry is the one who told me this story. And hours go by, and Ali's entertaining them with stories. He's doing magic tricks for them. And then after a while, realizes it's been most of the afternoon. They get in the car. Ali offers to drive them back to the motel that they're staying at by the airport. So they pile into Ali's Rolls Royce, and they drive this older man and his grandson to the hotel, and they say goodbye. They give hugs and handshakes, and when they're leaving, they're driving back to Ali's house. Larry Kolb, the manager, turns to Ali and says, Why did you spend the whole day with those people? You could have just signed an autograph and they would have been perfectly happy." And Ali said something that was really remarkable. He said, "I believe that there's a tallying angel, that there's an angel who's counting all of your good deeds and all of your bad deeds. And I've done a lot of bad things in my life. I've been not always a good husband, not always a good father. I've made a lot of mistakes, and this is my time to make up for those mistakes and to do more good deeds so that I go to paradise, because he had a very vivid impression of what hell was like and what paradise was like, and he really felt that he had work to do in order to ensure his place in paradise, and that's why he spent all that time with that older man and with his grandson. And
a very touching story. He actually did, he had a vivid image in your book. He talks about the hellfire, like the sizzling.
Yeah.
He thought it was
like putting your hand on a frying pan for eternity, for millions of years.
Yeah, but just to take a time out like that, and he puts them in his Rolls Royce and he takes them he spends, like he said, the day with them. That's something just unheard of. You think about celebrities and people, time is money.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
They don't have time for anyone. Just really, many people, not all, but many people are egotistic, narcissistic. They don't want to, connect with the outside world. But he connected. I mean, you show that he couldn't say no to anybody.
He loved it. He fed off of it.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say to him, he's a big famous guy, comes to your office for a business meeting or something. They'd say, Muhammad, we have a car waiting for you in the back alley so that you can get out of here quickly. And he'd say, no, pull it around to the front. I want the people to see me. And he'd spend an hour, even if he would be late for his next appointment, he'd spend an hour on the street just playing around with people. He couldn't get enough.
He loved people. Now let's talk about you now for a minute. What motivated you to write this book, this biography? So many have been written, so many documentaries, and now the timing now. What motivated you to put this together?
I was a kid in the 70s. I can remember rooting for Ali against George Foreman and Joe Frazier, and to me he was the greatest hero because he was so different. He was outspoken. He had political stands. He wasn't just about the sport. He was about something bigger, and as a kid, I didn't fully appreciate that, but I just knew there was something magical about this guy. And the fact that he was black, the fact that he was a Muslim, and as a kid to me, just kind of strange stuff that I didn't fully understand. But when it occurred to me that nobody had yet written a full biography of Ali, as you said, there have been documentaries, there have been a lot of books written about different aspects of his life, but nobody had done the full biography. And it's now 50 years since he took his stand against the Vietnam War. It's 53 years since he changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali and embraced Islam. I thought it was time, and enough time had gone by, that you could really put some of those events into historical perspective. And there were still enough people around to talk to who were alive back then, who knew him, including his wives. Ali was alive at the time I began this work. So it just seemed like the right time to do a big look at his life.
Were you there at his janazah, his funeral prayer?
Yes.
That was in his hometown?
Yeah, it was in Louisville. June of last year I was there.
Was your book already, you were still writing it in the ending phases? Or?
Yeah, I was getting close to done at that point, but I still had some work to do. So, but I had already spoken to most of the key people in his life, and saw them all down there at the janazah service.
Now, who were the key players in his life who are still around today? That some of them that you actually got to spend some time with?
Well, 3 of his 4 wives are still living. And
3 of them. There was the first one was.
His first one was
Belinda.
Sanji was his first wife, and she passed away in the 80s. But Belinda, who later changed her name to Khalila,
she was the one. Let me refresh that. Herbert Mohammed
introduced.
Right, okay.
Right. So she was raised in the Nation of Islam.
Yes.
And her parents were some of the very first members of the Nation of Islam. So it was almost like an arranged marriage, the Nation of Islam.
But she wasn't practicing, or she didn't. Is that the first one?
Sanji didn't practice.
Yes, she was. Then Belinda came. She's still around.
So
you got to spend some time with her?
I spent a lot of time with her.
Yeah.
As well as his third wife, Veronica, and his current wife, or his most recent wife, at the time of his death, he was still married to Lonnie.
Yeah.
So I spent time with all of them, and they're all remarkable women, and they obviously knew him better than anybody.
Yeah. And then you have how about some of the other key players like Herbert Mohammed? I wasn't too fond of him.
No, Herbert passed away.
Okay.
His son.
He was taking his cut was 30-40%.
Yeah, he took a lot of money from Ali, but Ali still loved him. Ali didn't care about money.
That was amazing.
He just let it go. And he knew Herbert was taking 30-40% of everything, and off the top, before taxes, before expenses. But Ali just didn't care. All his life, he didn't really care about money. He just, he said, if people want to take it from me, they must need it.
Yeah.
He had a really, some would say naive, other people would say amazing attitude.
What fight was that where you had Don King? I'm not too fond of him either. May God help us all, Is he still around?
Yeah, Don's still around.
Did you get to hang out?
Spend time with him.
So
yeah.
I don't know. There's hope for everybody. Until the end. But he went. There was a situation. I don't know. It was a fight that Ali was supposed to get. You talk about this in your book. He was supposed to get 6-7 million. Correct me if I'm ever wrong. And then he only gave him so much. And there was like $1.2 million left, something like that. So he goes and sends the guy with the notary, gives him 50,000, right? Mm-hmm. And Ali just
Ali signed a contract giving Don King $1 million in exchange for $50,000 in cash. And
$1 million, so he owes him $1 million.
So he's taking the cash, 50,000, and saying, "I'll give you a check for $1 million." So he's basically trading 50,000 for $1 million, and he knew it was stupid, but he just couldn't say no. And Don King just laughed all the way to the bank. So
you got to collect a lot of data, a lot of information. How did that feel? I mean, going back, to spend time. I would love to spend time. Some people who knew him the best, who were there with him they were there from the beginning, right?
Yeah, even his brother, who was only 2 years younger. His brother's still around, and I spent a lot of time with Rahman. And Rahman could tell you, what they had in the backyard, what kind of toys they had, where the goldfish pond was, all this stuff. He took me into their bedroom where they were raised, and told me, where the beds were positioned, and all of these great details that you can't really get if you wait another 10 or 20 years to write this book. So it was a real thrill for me to be able to walk in Ali's footsteps a little bit, and to see how he lived, and to know the people who knew him the best.
Tell us a little about yourself. How long have you been? How long have you had this passion for writing? When did you start? And talk to us a little bit about.
Sure, I've always liked writing, even from grade school days. And I worked at my school newspaper, and then worked at my hometown newspaper, and then went to college and studied journalism, and worked at newspapers all over the country, and ended up at the Wall Street Journal. That was my most recent job, and then started writing books.
You worked at the Wall Street Journal?
I worked at the Wall Street Journal for 6 years, and left there just to begin writing books, and I've been writing books for the last 15 years.
You did something also on Al Capone.
Yeah, I wrote a book about Al Capone.
How long ago was that?
That was 2010, I guess. It was really about the case against Capone, how the government went about trying to get him, and in many cases had to concoct evidence and do all kinds of sneaky things to put him away. Just to ask you about that, it's interesting. He actually died, Al Capone, of an illness, right? Syphilis. Right.
Yeah?
Yeah, he probably had it most of his adult life, and could have been treated for it early on, but wasn't. And as a result, by the time he went to prison, it began to affect his brain, and he began to go mad from the syphilis eating away.
Yeah, and you go over some new statistics regarding Muhammad Ali's condition, and you cite something like 200,000 plus hits that he took.
That's my best estimate. Yeah, what I did was I worked with a company that does boxing statistics, and we actually counted every punch that hit Ali over the course of his career. We watched every round of every fight, and we charted the punches, not just how many, but what kind of punch they were. So
hold on. So you actually said,
not me.
They did.
These guys from CompuBox.
Yeah, every punch.
Every punch he threw, and every punch that was thrown at him.
Yeah.
And we were able to see how much damage he was taking, how much damage he was giving over the course of his career. And you could see that as he gets older, which was to be expected, he begins slowing down and taking a lot more punches. And in the second half of his career, he's taking more punches than he's giving. So what I did was I took those numbers and I extrapolated them over the course of his amateur career. If we know that he took, for example, 13 punches per round on average over the course of his career. If you extrapolate that for his amateur career, for sparring sessions, for exhibitions, my estimate is that he took about 200,000 punches over the course of his career.
And it was said that in the early 70s is when his family was starting to get concerned about some of the brain damage that was happening. Is that correct?
That's right. They began to notice that he was slurring his speech, that he was mumbling. Even if you go back and you watch him on TV now, go on YouTube and just watch his interviews over the years, you can see it. That over the course of the 70s, his voice gets softer, harder to understand, and the words come more slowly. And this was a guy who was a brilliant linguist. I mean, he was a fabulous speaker. He was funny and he was quick, but it's sad. You can watch his speech deteriorating, and that's a sign of neurological damage.
Mm-hmm. But he kept on for another
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, he kept fighting. And even, when he began to realize it, there were all these interviews where he would ask reporters, do you think I'm getting punch drunk? Do you think I'm getting brain damaged? Because people say that I don't sound right. So he was aware of it. But the money was so good. He was being pushed by all these people around him to keep fighting because they liked having the money too. They liked the lifestyle. It's hard to give up.
Well, that shows. I mean, when we talk about his genuine, sincere love for people like this Herbert, and what role did Aram is still around today, right?
Yeah, Bob Aram's still around.
Did you spend time with him?
Yeah, I interviewed Bob a couple of times.
Yeah, and some of the other key players. I mean, this is just my opinion. When you really care for someone, right? When money's not a top priority, you want what's best for them.
Right.
You follow me? But you're talking about they like that entourage, they like the money, the fame, everything, and they're getting a part of that. And you really care for the man, and you're going to put him really first. And maybe this it wouldn't have went to the extent that it did. What do you think?
Yeah, it's tough to say because obviously responsibility lies with Ali primarily. But if some of the other people in his corner had said, I won't go, I won't be a part of this anymore, I quit, maybe it would have gotten his attention. I mean, his mother and father were saying quit, but they were still coming to his fights and still cheering for him. And, his family maybe could have done more too. It's hard to say, but all these people are, they're riding that train, they're taking that money, and nobody wants to see it end because they're never going to have easy money like that again.
I was getting the impression that because he continued to fight, he wasn't all there, and he wasn't able to make those decisions as someone who wasn't brain damaged the way he was.
That's right. It's a bit of a catch-22, right?
Yeah.
Is the brain damage making his judgment impaired so that he can't decide whether to quit or not? Mm-hmm. Or is it the other way around? It's really sad. It may be that he wasn't really in good enough shape anymore to make those decisions for himself, and a wife or a father or a mother should have come in and said, no more.
There was his trainer, and was it Angelo
Dundee?
Angelo Dundee. He's passed away.
Yes,
right?
he is.
But there was one fight where he threw in the towel. He stopped the fight. That was against was it Holmes?
Against Larry Holmes.
Larry Holmes.
Unfortunately, it was much too late. It was late in his career. He was already 40 years old. Or 39, and it was also just late in that fight. He'd already taken a massive beating. He never should have been in the ring that night at all.
Mm-hmm. We talked about him not being able to say no, right? But there was one man that you mentioned that he said no to, and it was Louis Farrakhan. He came to visit him, and he was trying to revive the nation.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, Farrakhan told me this story that really amazed me because
you got to spend time with him also.
I did. I got to
wow, you're
Farrakhan.
with everybody.
Yeah, I'm very persistent. I get people to talk to me. So, Ali became a Muslim because of the Nation of Islam, because of Elijah Muhammad.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the religion; it was race. It was a big part of it. He liked what it had to say about being black in America. So when Elijah Muhammad died, Elijah's sons took the Nation of Islam in a different direction, eventually broke it up, and took their followers into Orthodox Islam. And Ali went along and became a more traditional Muslim. But Minister Farrakhan decided he wanted to try to rebuild the Nation of Islam and restore the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. So he went to Muhammad Ali and said, Brother Muhammad, we did not become Muslims because of the Quran. We became Muslims because of the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. I want to restore the teachings. I want to rebuild the Nation of Islam, and will you come with me? And the story that Farrakhan told me is that they were in Ali's kitchen, and there was a football game on TV, and Ali said, Farrakhan, do you see that TV? You see that football game? How many people are in that stadium? And Ali said, everybody in that stadium knows me, but none of them know you. Get out. I'm not coming with you. I'm not coming back to the Nation of Islam. And it was an interesting story because it doesn't really. I think it was a very honest moment.
How long? Because earlier in his career, he was afraid that they would kill him. if he left the nation.
That's right. He was, he was afraid of Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad, as long as he was alive, was ran that organization with a lot of power, and obviously people felt like Malcolm X and others who crossed Elijah Muhammad paid for it. And Ali mentioned a couple of times that he was afraid if he ever left that he might be assassinated. Yeah.
Now I've talked about. I mean, you mentioned that towards the end of your book. You talk about his transition with Wallace D. Muhammad. So that's a key point that I'm trying to figure out because this was around what he was probably in his late 30s. Now that he finally accepted Islam. Real Islam, what we call it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, around what?
It would have been the late 70s.
The late 70s?
Early 80s.
Do you think he was considering coming over to Islam from the nation at that point when he was scared that they were going to kill him?
No, I don't think so. I think it was Elijah Muhammad's sons that helped him, guided him toward real Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've interviewed many. They have captains and former ministers from the nation, and we see a lot of this transition towards the end. Him and Malcolm also. Malcolm ended up leaving the nation, and because I make this differentiation, many people don't know that there's as Orthodox Muslims we don't consider this is kind of not real Islam, you know what I mean? Because the teachings of real Islam, when, for instance, like what they originally believed in, white man's the devil, this, that has nothing to do. That's like, worshiping a man. Real Islam calls about only worshiping the Creator. So many of these people who study the real Islam, they saw that, hold on, this has nothing, if you just open up the Quran, this has nothing to do with the real teachings. Mm-hmm. And they end up making that transition. But it's interesting that I'm trying to figure out at what point, because he was scared, but Wallace D ended up bringing a lot of people over. And then what happens from there, Farrakhan visits him to try to revive it, but then he said no.
Right, he was loyal to Wallace D. And one of the things that happened when Elijah died is Herbert told Ali that my father wanted you to listen to Wallace and to do whatever Wallace says.
Wait, Herbert
is Wallace's brother.
Oh, that's his brother now. Okay.
They're both sons of Elijah.
Which one is older?
I think Herbert was the older.
Herbert was the older, okay.
I think so. And it was Herbert who said, my father wishes for you to follow his successor, to follow Wallace D. and do whatever he is told, whatever he says. And Ali did that. And Wallace then began to transition toward Orthodox Islam, and Ali followed him. Yeah. But I don't think he would have done that prior to Elijah's death.
You talk about him also with his friends and colleagues, people who were Muslim, that how he was inviting them to pray.
I pray every morning at 5 o'clock. My clock rings at 4:30. I'm up at 5. I take a shower, and I put my white robe on. I put the towel on the floor, and I face the east towards Mecca. And we say, surely I have turned myself to thee, O Allah, trying to be upright, to him who has originated the heavens and the earth, and I am not of the polytheists. Surely my prayers, my sacrifices, my life, and my death are all for Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. No associates has he. This am I commanded. I am of those who submit. O Allah, thou art the King, thou art my Lord, and I am thine servant. I have been greatly unjust to myself, and I do confess my fault. So please grant me protection against all my fault, for none grants protection against faults but thou. And lead me to the best of morals, for none can turn away from me the worst of morals but thee. And guide me to the best of morals, for none can guide to the best of morals but thee.
You discussed that in your book. Could you talk about that? And his real devotion and the solace that he found in prayer.
Another bath, another shower, clean my mouth, pray, and at 5 in the morning, this goes on when I'm right. Now, I didn't do that for the first Frazier fight, nor the first Norton fight.
Really?
No, sir. My head got big, and I started thinking it was my training camp and my boxing ability that kept me where I was at, and God punished me, and he gave me a good whooping. He broke my jaw in the second fight, and he got me whooped and knocked down in the Frazier fight, and I realized I wasn't that great after all. So I had to get not only together physically, but spiritually. For this fight, I've prayed every day for 5 days, 5 times a day for the past 4 months, and everything is perfect. And if Allah's with me, it ain't no way no man can win. No way.
And these things that really, this is also towards, at what point in his life was this?
I think it was after he retired from boxing.
Yeah.
He began to develop a real interest in studying the Quran and studying Islam and learning from other teachers. He would go to the homes of famous imams and would study with them and just sit at their table and listen. And he wasn't speaking as much because his voice was vanishing. So he really would just sit silently for hours and listen. And he would transcribe from the Quran and transcribe from speeches from others things that he'd read, books about Islam, and that's how he taught himself, by transcribing a lot of it, because he was not a great reader. But if he transcribed something into a notebook or onto a note card, his brain would absorb it. So he liked to do that. He also liked to copy down the contradictions in the Christian Bible and point out all of the things in there that couldn't be true because it said something opposite in one part of the Bible. So he loved gathering a bunch of Christians around.
And I always ask my mother, I said, Mother, how come is everything white? I said, why is Jesus white with blonde hair and blue eyes? Why is the Lord's Supper all white men? Angels are white, Pope and Mary and even the angels. I said, Mother, when we die, do we go to heaven? She said, naturally we go to heaven. I said, well, what happened to all the black angels when they took the pictures?
All the mistakes that are in your Bible now, and then teaching them about the Quran. He really liked the idea of playing that role of teacher, and he would often, there'd be these sports fans who just wanted to be around Ali, and he'd say, come back to my hotel room, and the next 3 hours he'd be talking to them about the Bible versus the Quran, and bore them to tears. But he enjoyed that. I think it was important.
About him being also a peacemaker, going to other parts of the world and calling for this unity, this, because obviously there's a great misunderstanding about Islam today. I mean, you can't doubt it. Many politicians have exploited that fact. But even at his time, it wasn't as obviously as bad, I don't think. But he was talking to Americans here about Islam, encourages them to look into it, and then he would go abroad and visit different countries and talk about. You mentioned this in your book.
Yeah, he would travel a lot throughout the Muslim world, in particular, because he was the best-known Muslim in America, and he would say that the Muslims need to understand America, and Americans need to understand the Muslims better, because this was before 9/11, but there were still these terrorist attacks. There was the attack on the base in Lebanon, and there were all these. Even before 9/11, there was an image in some Americans' mind, a prejudice that Muslims were terrorists, and that was a generic label that was applied. And Ali really wanted to fight that. So he traveled around the world and in places that not a lot of Americans went. He went to Pakistan and Afghanistan and gave these lectures about the importance of trying to build bridges between the two societies and the two religions.
Yeah. How did that shift happen at a time? How was he foreseen by the American public when he refused to go into the war? And how that all changed? I mean, he went from being someone. I mean, he was like despised, wasn't he?
No. He was absolutely the most. I believe the most hated man in America.
The most hated
man in America during the late '60s, when he refused to fight in Vietnam and announced his allegiance with the Nation of Islam, which the FBI considered a terrorist cult, and he was stripped of his boxing license. He couldn't work. He couldn't travel outside the country. And that only began to change over time, and a couple things happened. One is the Vietnam War became terribly unpopular, and people realized that he had a point in opposing it. And they also began to believe that he was at least legitimate in his religious beliefs, that he wasn't faking it. Yeah. Whether you liked the Nation of Islam or not, you had to admit the guy was loyal and truly believed, or else he wouldn't have given up 3.5 years of his career and millions of dollars to stand up for his religious beliefs. And then later, by the 90s, he becomes a much more beloved figure, in part because he's been silenced by this disease, by Parkinson's. he doesn't talk as much, so he just becomes kind of like a teddy bear. We all want to hug him and love him, and then he goes around giving these speeches about religious tolerance, and he becomes a much more figure that we can all appreciate more.
Mm-hmm. Well, what another thing that inspires me, and then it shows that the earlier part of his life, and it's like anyone it's hard to. Fame opens up a whole another world of temptation and corruption and all these things that are calling you, right? And you get susceptible to that. And some people can't overcome it, and some people they drown themselves in all the things that come with it, right? And there's that part of his life, but then it just shows that a person who had no man's perfect. You make mistakes, and in the earlier part of his life. You can see where, and it goes with that story where he admits, I've done some bad things, but then it shows, that he really relied on the mercy of God, and he was really spending the latter part of his life, because he didn't talk about that he truly started to become a man until his late 30s, early,
right.
That he finally matured,
mm-hmm.
right, and then he started to really change his life and started to be a humanitarian and give back.
That's right. And he said often that, this disease in many ways may have been a gift, because it forced him to slow down. It forced people to look at him differently and to say, he was the greatest, the fastest, the strongest, the prettiest, and now look, he's trembling, he can't speak, but he was never ashamed of it. He stood up there in public and let people see him that way.
First of all, I want to thank Almighty God, Allah, for you all. Thank God for my talent. All the praise and honor that we give goes to Allah.
Who are you most grateful to for your career?
My career, everything. Allah. All my success, all my protection, all my feelings. All my victory, all my courage, everything comes from Allah.
And he said, I want people to see me this way, because they'll know that we're all human, and it'll help other people to deal with their problems. So he was, in some ways, he was the biggest egotist of all time, but in some ways he was really humble, and really believed that he was no different from anybody else.
So after speaking to all these countless, array of different people who were, there from the beginning, how did that leave you off? The feeling, it's like you know him better now than
I know him, I know him better than I know some of my own family. It's funny because there were times when and this happens with your own family too.
Yeah.
There were times where I was just so mad at him. How could you behave that way? How could you be so stupid? How could you say such a thing? But he always won me over again. He always came back and did something to charm me and to make me feel like he was a good person in the end. And it's complicated. Anytime you devote 4 years of your life or more to diving into another person's life, there's going to be some stuff that disturbs you. But overall, I felt like that I love the guy.
So that took you said 4 years to
a little more than 4 years.
Wow, that's it. That's a full-time job. dedicated 4 year. People go to college 4 years.
That's right. Yeah.
This is the Ali
I learned
Institute.
more in these 4 years.
Wow, you got a degree in Muhammad Ali.
That's right.
Yeah. So your book now is titled Ali, and this is going to be. Where can people get the book?
It goes on sale October 3rd. It'll be on Amazon and all the bookstores, independent neighborhood bookstores should all have it. I hope people will check it out. And there's an audio book and an ebook too, so it should be easy to find.
You're going to have it on Audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you the one that's...
No, they got a real actor to do it, somebody better than me.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, I appreciate you spending the time with us here on The Dean Show and sharing some of these insights from his life. Hopefully, there was a lot to cover. Hopefully, God willing, we can have you back.
That'd be great.
Because there's a lot more to talk about.
Anytime.
It's a big book, but we had a short amount of time. God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for tuning in. Jonathan with his new book, Ali. And make sure you check it out, and we'll see you next time here on The Dean Show. Until then, peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.
What's the best thing I can do? Get ready to meet God. Owning real estate, going in business, teaching boxers, that won't get me to heaven.